JP,
What's happening, Ashby?
long time no see.
I know it feels like it's been a minute, huh?
It's been about 10 years. I feel like we went from being in a press box every day and now it's, doldrums of summer. There's nothing to watch. There's nothing to see. It's that time of year for sure.
The season ended too prematurely,
It did.
for
I
sure.
would agree with that. Well, because it is, middle of the summer, we're a couple months away from football, long way away from college baseball at this point. It does feel interesting to be talking about it, but I think we do have a lot to talk about, and it's fun to think about some sports right now when there's not a ton going on.
Yeah, the actually, for us, football is going to start in about 2 weeks.
Okay,
But
for
for
the Clemson
yeah,
fan,
but going back to baseball, there. If you're talking about Clemson's team specifically, this is a entirely different looking team than it was a month ago. They have been doing a lot of work. They have done a lot of work to address some of the holes in that lineup. They're gonna be a lot of new faces next time we see those guys on the diamond.
it's definitely going to be very fun. But before we break down all that, I want to go ahead and thank our sponsor, Shorty and Goose's Driving School, who is your one-stop driving shop. They have you covered. And to start with very important stuff, JP, how was your summer going?
Fast. It's going by quickly. That's what. But I'm starting to get a little restless. I've been home for too long. And it's probably hadn't been but about 3 weeks, but I've been home a little bit too on too many days consecutively. I think my wife's ready for me to leave again. We're fixing to go on
Needs a break.
vacation. By the time we get back, she will definitely be ready for me to be gone for a couple of days. But it's going better than it started. So
I would agree. It feels like College World Series and certainly the regionals and super regionals. It feels like that was about 4 years ago to me at this point.
it does, and it really wasn't that long ago, but it kind of does. I really thought Coastal had a shot, to kind of pull the upset there against LSU, but the Bayou Bengals kind of slapped them down there and swept them 2 games to none. But yeah, it was a good College World Series, but man, you just hate when it ends because it's so far away from when it begins again.
Exactly. I think especially for baseball, like, you and me will go watch scrimmages, not scrimmages. We'll go watch stuff in the fall. And, I think last year we did that after a football loss is kind of a palate cleanser to start thinking about baseball. But we definitely still got a minute. And I think there's a lot of movement still to be done. But I think it definitely is fun to talk about some moves that have been made. And, watching the College World Series and watching that Coastal team and that LSU team, I think it was pretty obvious to me what made both of those teams so dominant. And a lot of it was pitching. And it was the ability to be clutch. And, we heard from Coach Bakich in his press conference 15 minutes after Clemson was eliminated, like, all right, we're gonna go get some guys, essentially. And I think that's what they've done so far. So we'll kind of talk through all of it. But first impressions, and, if you're a Clemson baseball fan, this may seem obvious, but what do you think were the biggest holes that needed to be filled? And especially with guys leaving, what do you think this team needs to do to take a step and, get through a regional and eventually further?
2 things. And like you just said, it's kind of obvious, but you needed some pitching depth. You'd like to see him go out and sign this front line, nab this front line established starter out of the portal. Not sure Clemson can really afford that. I don't think a lot of people recognize that, but so you're kind of looking for guys a little bit a notch below maybe, but so you're looking for some pitching depth, and you got to do something to address all the holes you had offensively. You know, we talked ad nauseum about, you know, the lack of power. You know, Bakich even referenced, you know, guys that can change the game with one swing of the bat. And even beyond that, you know, they didn't have guys that were hitting for average. Not many players on the roster had high OPSs. So I think they needed to go out and kind of bolster that lineup offensively and add some pitching depth. And I think they definitely did the offensive part, you know, to at least to the degree that you wanted to see. And I think they made some improvements, you know, on the pitching side of things too. I personally would have liked to have seen one more added. And I'm not convinced we don't see one more added before it's all said and done. But you know, as it stands here, as we stand here today, I think they're better today than they were a month ago.
Are you taking into account the guys headed out with that, or are you saying just based off of like the last 3 weeks?
Just based off everything, you know, you take the guys going out, take the guys coming in, the freshmen, the portal. I think the team's better than they were, you know, at the end of the season.
So let's start by kind of talking about the pitching changes and who's leaving. And, you know, the obvious two that you think of guys that are veteran guys that are going to be done with college baseball is a Reed Garrison and a Lucas Malstead, who were the backbone of the team, in my opinion, in a lot of ways this year for the vast majority of the season. You know, Garris gets hurt later in the year. Malstead struggled a little bit down the stretch, but how do you kind of how do you see the new guys kind of stepping into those roles, or is it going to be somebody else that's going to step up? Or do you even need somebody to be as dominant as they were?
Yeah, I think you need somebody. I mean, I think you need somebody to step up for sure, because that's a lot of production you're replacing, you know, and that's just two pitchers that are out of eligibility. You know, they've lost one or two more that'll probably be felt. But you're going to need somebody to step up and fill that void. And I think that's, you know, I think they tried to address some of that with some of these portal moves that they made. Go back to, you know, a couple of the first moves they made not long after the season ended. The Ariston VC kid from Alabama and Hayden Simerson. You know, the VC kid, he's got, it's a very small sample size. He hasn't really pitched much at this level yet. He only pitched in 5 games for Alabama last season, 3 2/3 innings. So I think he had more walks than he did the 3 innings. You know, but he's still a young guy, several years of eligibility left. But when you go out and get a guy like Simerson, when you're losing a closer and you go out and add a guy like Simerson, and trust me, I get it. He's from Division II, Catawba. We saw some players struggle on this year's team with making the move up in competition. But we've also seen guys like Lucas Malstead make the move up and have some success. But this is a guy that had a 3.36 ERA last year, 16 saves, actually led the country. That's the kind of guy that they're going to need to be productive out of that bullpen next year. And then you're going to need some of those younger guys already on the roster to kind of take a step. Drew Titsworth, you know, we saw him start. We saw him in relief. I prefer him, you know, as a relief pitcher, you know. But
me as well.
That's just me. I thought he was at his best the first half of the season coming out of the pen. And a guy like, you got Jacob McGovern back. Brendan Bennett should be back healthy next year. I think Joe Allen's back next year. And then you need guys like Nathan Dvorsky and Justin LeGuernick to kind of not just take a step, take big steps. Because you're gonna need to they're gonna need to help this team next year and not do what they did this year. You know, LeGuernick got off to a little bit of up and down start. There was some bad, good, bad, and then it turned out pretty much all bad. You know, just like he lost his confidence. Hopefully he can get some of that back in summer ball. But
except for ACC championship game. He came in and was one of the only bright spots of that entire game against North Carolina. I would have to go back and look and see what he did, but that was encouraging to me to see.
Two and 2/3, 6 strikeouts.
Yep. This is a guy that at the beginning of the season, you dubbed as a weekend starter. There has to be something there, and I think he showed that. And that to me is a guy that you have to see take a step next season.
And another thing, I'm not sure about the Emerson kid, but Ariston Visa, he's one of those flamethrowers, that Clemson doesn't have. He throws in the mid-90s. That they wanted to add a power arm or two. You get that in him. He's just going to have to be developed. And I think Clemson's got the right pitching coach in place to do that. But, yeah, you're going to also have to have some of those young guys already on the roster that kind of struggled this year, get it together and take the necessary steps and be productive next year.
I think here's the thing about the Emerson kid, and I think it's a really, really good pickup. I think is Clemson fans are a little bit gun-shy because of that transition, like what you were talking about. But with the Malstead, with the Ryan Weidman, it's been shown that it can be done. And this is a guy with 73 strikeouts to 19 walks. I mean, I think just that consistency and that kind of a solid presence of a guy that has a lot of innings, I think that's going to be a really good pickup. Another pitcher, and I think the most recent commitment is Michael Sharman from Tennessee. Tell me about him. I think you got to talk to him. What did he have to say about Clemson?
Left-handed pitcher, not a flamethrower. He doesn't throw mid-90s. He can get up into the lower 90s, not mid-90s. I was told to think Ethan Darden, kind of when you think of Michael Sharman when it comes to velocity. But you're talking about a guy that's got experience pitching, at the highest of levels. He pitched for Tennessee this year. Spent a couple of seasons at JUCO before Tennessee, so he wasn't on the national title winning team. But he had a lot of it. He had a lot of appearances for those guys this year. I mean, in some big time situations. I'm trying to. That might not have been him. I'm trying not to get two players confused here. But you're talking about a guy with a sub 3.50 ERA, and you need to add. You needed to add another piece of that bullpen, and I think that's what they do here. And a guy, I mentioned that word established earlier. He is an established reliever from the SEC. You don't have to worry about him having to make the jump up in competition. He's kind of been there, done that. And he's he seems like a very nice guy. I got to spend about 15 minutes on the phone with him the other day. He was headed up to the Cape, had I think he said a 16-hour drive to go play
it's like
summer
a great
ball.
Migration this time of year. I feel like of college baseball players making however long them drives they need to up there.
And it shows you how dedicated they are. I mean, we're talking about 16 hours. That's almost a full day of driving.
That's no joke.
That's dedication. That is dedication to your craft. That is dedication to wanting to get better. That's why these guys go play in the Cape. It's the premier summer league, in my opinion. You get, as the coaching there is as good as it gets. And Clemson's got several guys that are playing in the Cape this summer. So you hope to see some of those guys, or it end up paying off for some of those guys developmentally wise.
I mean, I think this is just a small sample size from social media. It looks like there's been some Clemson guys with success. Saw Colin Priest with, I think, already a few home runs, and I don't know. I think just the ability to get reps every day and build that confidence and know you're going against good competition. I think it really is such a good opportunity for those guys.
I think what you said there right at the end, the confidence part. I think some of these players on this roster, they got dinged. The confidence level got dinged with some of them this year. Priest is probably a good example. He did not have as bad a season as some make out. He did not have the kind of impact that was expected when he came over through the portal before the season. So he's a prime example of a kid that can, really help himself out this summer.
And I think his upside is so high too. And, we talk about it. I think he was still third team all ACC. Like he had great moments this season, and a lot of those guys did. I think the issue is just putting it all together at the right time. And I think that'll probably be a factor and a focus going into next year. Definitely excited to see how starting pitching ends up, because clearly you got your Friday night starter. You know who that's going to be, and that's going to be Aiden Kog. But you're in a situation where kind of, again, it feels like the other two are up for grabs, because Dane Muller's doing Tommy John recovery. Do you think that's a Talon Bell? Like, obviously this is 9 months away or something, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think Talon Bell's a candidate for sure, but he's one of those players that could absolutely benefit from going and having a good summer. He needs to work on developing an out pitch. He needs to work on getting it. I don't think his velocity's back all the way up to where it's going to be. I think he's probably could still add another mile an hour or two. It's easy to forget that once he did finally make his debut, he's way behind the other guys because he was not cut loose for a while, didn't throw in the fall. So he's a true freshman that's kind of coming in behind the 8 ball a little bit. I think that guy's got a lot more potential than what we saw this year, because he was another one of those that were up and down. I definitely think he's a candidate for the rotation, though, for sure. And a big part of that's going to be when you do get Dane Muller back. We've seen it time and again. This coaching staff takes it slow with these guys. Bell's a prime example. What were we, 6 weeks into the season before he made his debut? And Muller, he had his surgery the first week of the season, if I'm remembering right, or like a day or two before they went to Arlington to start the season. So, it'll be just a year once the season starts next year. Some people like to look at McGovern as maybe a potential starter. I don't. I think he's too crucial of a piece in that bullpen, not to mention I don't know. He's, more often than not, you don't want him facing the lineup more than one time through, just because of the type of pitcher he is. I think Brendan Bennett's kind of a wild card here. I think he's got some potential. Made two starts.
We didn't see him for
part
of the later half of the season.
He made 2 midweek starts coming off Tommy John, and they shut him back down. So no, we did not see him. You got some candidates. There's a couple of freshmen coming in that maybe will compete. The last 2 years, we've seen a true freshman win a spot in the rotation. Talon Bell this year, Knog last year. So it's not like Bakich is wary of starting freshmen. There's one, and his name is escaping me right off the top of my head. Hold on one sec. Nick Frusco, who maybe could be a candidate. He want to say he went and competed in the MLB draft combine. I know he was scheduled to, never did see for sure that he went. He was like ranked number 249 overall going in. Once it was over, he was no longer ranked. But it kind of gives you an idea of what scouts think of him. He was a couple of weeks ago ranked as one of the top 250 players in the country. So I think he's another guy that could give you, or is another guy that is an option. And again, I'm not convinced that they're done in the portal just yet. I think there's another pitcher to be added before it's all said and done. And I lean towards thinking it'll be a guy that can come in and start.
So kind of just talking through the logistics of the portal and when all that stuff has to be verified. When will we see kind of the last – when did players have to decide where they're going, essentially, is what I'm getting at?
Most of these guys enrolled. They should have enrolled this week.
That was my thought.
Yeah. But we saw with like Casey Talent yesterday, he just went in yesterday, and good luck to him trying to make a comeback bid. He's not pitched in 2 years after dealing with an injury and at least 3 surgeries to try and come back from that injury. So, but I mean, it's different for different players. You know, undergraduates, you already have to be in. I remember I had a conversation with Ryan Weidman a few weeks ago, right after he committed. And he was telling me how he had to be committed by July the 2nd or July the 3rd. I can't remember what it was. And I didn't really understand why, but that's what he said.
You got to get registered for class.
Yeah. But he was talking about his draft status, or maybe I misunderstood. He might have been talking about registration for class. So, you know, I'm like you. I'm thinking they got to be enrolled this week, but I've been led to believe there's one more coming. So we'll see how that works out. Maybe it doesn't work out that way, but you know, they made a new rule yesterday, or finalized, I think it was yesterday, finalized one yesterday, where if you're a non-scholarship player and the team was planning to cut you to get down to that 34, the roster size that they've got to be at in the future, you can enter the portal. They've got certain dates for you. So, I mean, it's different with those guys. So, I mean,
it feels like there's a new rule or add on to this stuff every day right now, to me.
Yeah, and you know, the House settlement makes it a little bit murkier because the judge made them include in there where, you know, the guys not on scholarship who I term as walk-ons. That's just kind of the way I see them. If you're not on any kind of scholarship, you can't cut them if they were already on the roster. So you don't have to. Everybody thought that the teams had to be at 34 by a certain point in 26, or even this year, not 26, 25, but like the football roster would have to be at 105 before the start of the season, and baseball would have to be at 34 next year. It's not necessarily going to be the case, not based on the way I read it anyways, because you're not allowed to cut those guys. They're grandfathered in, basically. So they can stay as long as they have eligibility left. You don't have to put them on scholarship, and you can't cut them. So there will be teams that are still over the 34. But, yeah, I'm like you. The portal stuff gets a little murky for me because every time I think I know like what a deadline is for this and a deadline for this
changes
for that. Yeah, something happens and I'm like, well, I thought that couldn't happen, but sure enough, it does. So,
well, that, and then on top of it, you're not going to know who your 34 or however many are anywhere close to that until after July 14th, after the draft. Who do you think of these transfers / freshmen coming in? Who do you think, if you had to guess, will and will not make it to campus?
I think there will be 2 that will not.
Okay.
Weidman and the freshman coming in, Dax Kilby.
Didn't he come in like 4th in the 40 or something at the combine?
Killed it at the combine. Just killed it. You know, I think that's, you know, we've only talked about the transfer pitchers, you know, but
that's what I'm getting at.
You see them at a guy like Tyler Lichtenberger, and it starts, hey, no, they're already preparing for that. And they took more outfielders technically, or guys that can play outfield, than they have outfield spots.
Which is what I wanted to ask you about. Are they all going to play in the outfield? Because you're losing Dom Listy, Cam Canarella, you're losing Andrew Chufos at shortstop. They got more guys than that just from the portal alone, plus guys that have been there for now a couple years that are going to be competing for those spots. How do you see that lining up? What was the thought process there, you think? And
you lose Wentworth, who was the starting right fielder for the final couple of weeks of the season. To me, that was the biggest one. That was the one that surprised me more than anything. But that's an excellent question. I think one of those guys can come in and play first. There's a couple of that would be outfielders. And back to your previous question, I think Weidman's Major League Baseball bound. I don't think he plays for Clemson next year. I think they knew when they took him, it was chances were between slim and none. He was pretty transparent about that stuff. But it's as far as where all these guys are going to play, I thought it was interesting when Bakich went on Phil Kornblut's show last week before last, whenever it was, and he started talking about draft guys.
Yep.
He made it a point to mention Jacob Jarrell.
Yep.
I found that interesting. One of the guys that they took is a catcher / outfielder. So maybe Nate Savoy is who I'm talking
First team
about.
All-American, freshman All-American. Don't hate that.
So maybe you start leaning towards thinking Jarrell's not coming back and you got to replace him. And I think that's what they've done here with Savoy. I don't think Weidman ever makes it to campus, unfortunately, because that's another guy that killed it last year. I think then you got Lichtenberger, the infielder, Cleavon, the infielder, and Daly, the guy that killed it at Mercer. He told me he was coming to play corner outfield, didn't know which spot yet. So I think you got a couple outfielders to kind of slide into the places of the guys you have leaving, and then you have one spot open for some guys that are on the roster.
So you think Ty Daly's coming to play right field or left field? Do we think Bryce Clayon, isn't that his name? Do we think he's going to be in center field to replace Cam Canarella?
I think he's an infielder, based on what he told me, anyways. But he also said he could play multiple positions. So I mean, you've got guys that can play multiple positions. I think he's certainly capable of doing that if you need him to. I think Lichtenberger's coming to be your shortstop. Fingers crossed. Hopefully, you hope a guy like Castellani would be ready to slide in if needed next year. But I'm not sure who's going to be the center fielder net yet. I might would have had Whitworth kind of slotted into that role, but then he takes off. Maybe it is a guy like Clayon. I mean, there's a couple of options you could go to. Somebody in here saying no one to play center field. There's definitely somebody that can't play center field.
You have to keep in mind that Clemson fans have been spoiled for a hot minute with center fielder. That just hasn't been a question.
And whoever plays center next year is going to have lofty expectations that they'll never be able to live up to. But that's just kind of the way it goes. That's part of this.
I mean, I'm excited to watch the Clayon Kid play. Coming from Georgia, he was the number one shortstop out of Georgia in high school. He was a freshman last year. He was 5 for 15 with a double, a triple, a home run. And from what I've heard, he has crazy athleticism that I think could slot him to play that position. And I think he played some there in Georgia or in high school.
He's played some center.
Yeah.
When I talked to him, Wentworth had not left yet. So let's put that out there too. But he did tell me that he's capable of playing center fielder.
So of all these guys we're talking about, who are you personally most excited to see play of the guys that you think will make it to campus?
For me, it's the right now of all the transfers, all the incoming freshmen, I'm going with the Emerson Kid. I don't, Clemson's just got a couple of big holes to replace in that bullpen. I am very anxious to see what he's done and how that translates, how what he's done translates to playing at this level. I think he's got over 70 career innings pitched. Doesn't even have 20 walks. I mean, he's been a model of consistency.
Is he going to be a junior?
He's got 2 seasons left.
Okay. So that many innings in 2 seasons, and he's been that successful. I think you feel good about that transition. I don't think there's anything he could have done more at that level,
No, me neither. So he would be the pitcher and of the, fielders. I'm going with the easy one here, Daly.
Oh yeah,
because they just lacked pop in that lineup last year. Outside of Gerald, he gave you what you thought you'd give. He actually gave him a little more than I thought he'd have home run wise this year. But he was kind of the only one that outperformed what I was expecting from a home run standpoint. And this is a guy that he's never hit less than 18 in a season.
that's what I was about to say.
He's hit like,
how long has it been? I don't think there was anybody close to that we could say that about on last year's team.
No, and I mean, and he can hit. He's a power hitter that doesn't hit 250. He hit 280 last year, and that ballpark he plays in or played in at Mercer, it's not some small bandbox that the ball flies out of. That's not why he hits all these home runs. It's a pretty it's kind of the dimensions are kind of similar to Doug Kingsmore because that was one of the things I was curious about. I went and made sure. But he's got 1 year left, and that's kind of the guy that I'm looking forward to seeing. I guess the most just because of the power numbers, and that's something that Clemson just lacked so much of this year.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying earlier, Coach Backich talking about guys that can change the game with a swing. I think that's your number one guy that can bring that to the table. And, I mean, you're just talking about somebody that has been solid for 3 years. It's not like last year had some huge breakout season. This is a guy that's played a lot of college baseball, has seen a lot of success, was slated to be the preseason SoCon Player of the Year. And I think a guy like that, it transfers. Like, I think it will. He has had about 50 strikeouts per year, which honestly, with the production that he's given, you take that. I think you do.
Yeah,
that's great.
That doesn't bother me.
Not at all.
1B for me would be Savoy because he brings a lot of pop too. So I'd say 1A and 1B because he hit 20 long balls last year. But he's going to be one of those guys.
Amazing.
Yeah, I don't know much about the ballpark he was playing in out there at Loyola Marymount, but he, like you mentioned earlier, he's a freshman All-American. But he's going to kind of fall kind of under that same scope as Gaffney and Priest. Saw him do it as freshmen. Now you got to see him step up a level in competition and do it as sophomores. The Dally kid's done it for 3 years now. But Savoy, he even hits that for average more so than Dally. He hit 300 last year, drove in 61 runs. So, I mean, they absolutely went out and did all they could to put some pop back into the lineup.
It's definitely going to be interesting. You know what I would like more than anything is for Luke Gaffney and Colin Priest to just have huge monster seasons. How awesome would that be? It's kind of a full circle to their freshman year. And I think that's the thing too. You've had a year to adjust. You've seen what you need to work on really clearly. And I can see a lot of guys stepping up. And to be honest with you, I think a lot of people need to, especially like you were saying on the pitching side of things. So it's going to be really interesting to see who makes it to campus, who makes it back to campus. Will a Jacob Gerald be back? And if you had to say one thing that you hope they can still get, you'd say you need a starting pitcher?
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to see one more pitcher added and a starter for sure. I think that's where you're kind of lacking in depth. We've just seen it just goes back to even before Eric Backich came to Clemson. We've just seen, the injury bug kind of have its impact on the rotation year after year after year after year. I mean, don't get me wrong, not just the rotation, the bullpen too, but we're talking about the rotation specifically here. And I don't think you can go into next year thinking all of a sudden it's not going to affect you next year. I mean, you got to have more than 3 starters. And right now, I don't know that when the season starts next year, I don't know that they got 3 healthy ones, that you can go out there and feel confident in and week out. I mean, it might turn out to where so-and-so goes out and he does exactly what he needs to do this summer, takes a big jump in the fall, and by the preseason gets here, he's ready to roll. Who knows? Maybe Titsworth gets converted into a starter and he takes a step, and there's no telling what could happen. But as we sit here today, I just don't know that there are 3 guys that I would feel, say, man, I feel good about that guy to go out and get a win no matter what day he's pitching, no matter what weekend, no matter the opponent. I don't feel that way right now.
And watching those teams that were in Omaha and the teams in the final, you felt good about 3 starters plus some.
Oh, yeah.
That's a whole nother issue. Because
that was a big part of Coastal's success this year. They've always been such a good offensive team, not so much pitching depth. But they went out and they fixed that over, before the season, last off season. They added some arms and they had the depth. So they had it all this year, and that played a huge part in them, getting back to national prominence this year.
And I think a lot of that's coaching and development, and I mean, there's a lot of factors that go into that, and certainly in today's world, a lot of factors that go into getting guys from the portal, especially those 97 plus arms. Like it's a tough thing, but I think Coach Backage and his staff have showed quickly. I mean, it was pretty immediately after the season started that improving was a priority. And I thought it was funny too when he was on that podcast talking about, if you're a pitcher that Clemson's looking, if you have the stuff we need, come talk to us. I love that because it was like, they're still working. That's
a big part of, every player you talk to pretty much loves him. I'm not saying everybody does, but most everyone. He's just a different kind of cat, And going back to those 97, 98 mile an hour flamethrowers, those guys don't grow on trees the way people think they do. And the ones that are available, they come with a pretty hefty price tag. And I just don't know that Clemson can really afford it, for the baseball program. They're not rolling in NIL money over there. And so you got to be kind of frugal with what you have. Be careful how you spend it. Maybe you could go out and land one of those guys and then not have anything else left to go out and sign anymore. I mean, I don't think people think about that sometimes, but I think they've done a pretty good job with what they've got to work with, financially and those kind of things. But still would like to see one more added. Somebody's asking about the portal. It is closed until next summer. It was open from June 1st to July 1st for undergraduates anyways. Graduates can enter pretty much nilly-willy. And then this new window for designated student athletes who would have been cut because of the roster limits.
i.e. walk-ons.
Bingo. Between July 7th and August 5th, they can enter. But as far as the regular window for non-graduate transfers, it closed on the 1st.
So everybody that's an undergraduate player for Clemson that was there last year, at this point, if they haven't announced they're leaving, they'll be back.
They'll be back. Correct.
Well, it's going to be interesting. It's been fun to talk about this because, it's when you are so far away from it, it's fun to have storylines and things to talk about and things to look forward to. So it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, I really like what they've done, for the most part. Again, I've made it no secret that I wish they could add one more arm. But what they've done, I've been thoroughly pleased with, especially, after the first couple of early moves, were a couple of guys that didn't have a lot of experience in the Division II pitcher, and you're like, you're starting to scratch your head a little bit. Like, what we doing? And then all of a sudden you see some of these later moves, and you're like, okay, I see it now. I see it. I see what you're doing. But I do think it's going to be, he's kind of retooled the roster here.
Pretty
Don't get
much.
me
I
wrong.
mean,
There are going to be some familiar faces back. There are going to be a lot of new faces on this team.
there's not many guys from last year's team just sitting here looking at it that I'm like, yeah, well, he's obviously going to be that. I think there's a couple, but
there's actually a couple that I thought were surefire guys that were going to transfer out.
Me too.
Especially after a couple of these guys were added, but they've chosen to stay. So we'll see what happens there.
I think it's wide open right now with who goes where.
Yeah, fall ball. If anybody that there's not many people that do, but if you're one of those ones that goes out and watches practice in the fall and some of the scrimmages,
weird people like JP.
Yeah, people like me. That'll be fun to watch to kind of see where they're trying to, because that's when you see some of this tinkering. We'll try this guy here, try him over here, and you start wrongly assuming or you might start wrongly assuming, hey, this guy's going to play there. Well, I saw him over here 2 days in a row, and all of a sudden, preseason, you don't ever see him there again. Some of them you don't ever see at all during the season. But it's fun to watch how they mix and match, and some of that stuff. One of the biggest things for me is usually during those scrimmages, they'll let the pitcher go either two. Like most of the time, it's 2 innings, sometimes 1. And if Bakich has to go out there and take a guy out, he's really struggling because he usually lets them pitch. I think I've only seen it twice at the scrimmages I've been to, and both times he ended up staying.
That's what I was gonna say. We were like, oh man,
yeah,
this has not been somebody's day when Eric Bakich is out there throwing warm-up pitches.
Matter of fact, I'm not gonna mention the name, but I want to say that both times I saw it was the same guy.
I believe so.
I'm not 100% on that, but I believe it was, and he is no longer on the team. So,
portal moves, everyone.
Portal moves.
It's gonna be interesting.
Those scrimmages, they can be a little tedious, but man, there's a lot of mixing and matching that makes them a little fun to watch, and you get stuff that you wouldn't otherwise get. You get an idea of who can do what, who's going to play where, what pitchers they really like, because especially if you go to enough of them, you can really start to tell them.
Well, I think that's our next step is watching fall ball. It's going to be interesting. But JP, I hope you have a great time on vacation. Tell the fam I said hey, and I don't know when we'll be back here, but we should do it again soon. There's any news.
Maybe once we get into fall ball, we can do something, if there's something, newsworthy to get into. But if not, we'll definitely be right back here doing this on a weekly basis next season.
Oh yeah, we'll be back. All right, JP. Bye.
Hey, I'll see you in Charlotte.
I'll see you there. Bye.